I might get started as people start arriving. We've got a few formalities to go through, so that should let a few more people arrive into the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Alexis Tyndall. I'm the Manager of Digital Innovation here at the University of Adelaide Library. I live and work on the lands of the Kaurna people, and before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to them as the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands that we gather on, even in a virtual sense here. I acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. I know we have at least one presenter from a different region here, so Bill is joining us from Newcastle, and I extend that respect to fellow relative communities in other regions who might be represented. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first webinar in the 2021 series of the University Library's Digital Humanities Lab. The objectives of this series of webinars and in-person events is to showcase digitally innovative work here at the University of Adelaide, encourage and inspire researchers or students interested in using digital methods or tools, support a bit of peer learning amongst our own community, and facilitate networking that might lead to interdisciplinary or cross-campus collaboration. As such, we'll be presenting a series of 4 webinars on digital methods in the humanities across the course of the year, complemented by a series of in-person gatherings. As someone who's registered online for this webinar, you will be sent notice of when future sessions are open for registration, but you can also find all the information about the whole program plans on the University Library website. So today, in this first webinar, we'll be talking about mapping in the humanities. A number of humanities projects, as many of you know, are exploring the use of maps as a way to analyse, interpret and communicate research. Mapping can be a really great way of sharing the results of our research to a broader audience outside the traditional academic journal or to our own colleagues. Maps can provide a connection point, with locations being the link that can bring 2 data sets together for interesting and new interpretations and insights. I've seen lots of really interesting applications in history, literature studies, art history, and as we can probably expect, maps are fundamental to many social science research applications. So today we're joined by 4 excellent speakers. The process of today is that I will initially introduce our first 3, whose presentations complement each other, and then come back online to introduce our final speaker. Please feel free, you'll be able to see a chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please feel free to ask questions at any point during the webinar, and I will pose those questions to our speakers in the closing section. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speakers. We have Associate Professor Rob Foster and Dr. Skye Krichauff from the School of Humanities here at the University of Adelaide. Rob has worked in the field of Australian Indigenous history and comparative Indigenous history for many years, and has written a variety of books on the topic in collaboration with Amanda Nettlebeck. His most recent book, A History of South Australia, was co-authored with Paul Sendyuk and published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. Skye is an ethnohistorian who combines the methodologies of history and anthropology. She's interested in colonial cross-cultural relations, the relationship between history and memory, and how societies live with historical injustices, and in particular how Australians live with the enduring legacies of colonialism. They're working together on an ARC-funded project called Reconciling the Frontier, Accounting for Colonial Conflict. And on that project, they're collaborating with Jarrod Lange, who you can see on the screens as well, who's a senior research consultant with the Hugo Centre for Population and Housing. Jarrod specialises in location-based research and consultancy projects. Most recently, he's been co-authoring web-based geospatial solutions using the Esri Story Map platform that increase the reach and appeal of research content and data on topics that include things like South Australia's multicultural history and an interactive map showing where Australia's present and future frail people live, and which can help plan services for healthy ageing. So a bit of a broad range of interests, and with that I will turn off my speaker and camera and invite Rob and Skye to kick us off. Thank you.
No worries, thanks very much. I'll just get, here we go. Okay. So look, really, thanks again, Alexis, for the opportunity to speak. My name's Jarrod Lange. As Alexis mentioned, I'm from the Hugo Centre. I also work with the Centre for Housing, Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Adelaide, based in the School of Social Sciences. Now, you've already heard from Rob and Skye about how we're using this technology. I wanted to focus a little bit more on the specifics of this technology and how it could possibly work as a research communication tool from a digital humanities perspective. So storytelling is one of those traditions that's been present in every culture, and every map very much tells a story. The one you see there is a classic example of a very clear message from a map that shows you where the sheep haves and the sheep have-nots exist in Australia back in the 1920s. Now, every map tells a story about its place it depicts. It talks about authors' perspectives and it shows their biases at the time it was created. And it has that focus on that message. And that's very true today. Hard copy maps are still in wide circulation and use, but there's this up and coming focus and interest in moving towards story maps or web-based mapping. Now, the technology has come a long way in the last decade. As Rob mentioned, this was a vision for them to have some of their research available in this kind of medium. I think today what's making it more easier for people to access and use is the fact it doesn't require computer coding. You used to have computer experts there writing the code, developing something that was quite bespoke. There's now a number of templates and strategies in which enable you to deliver this type of resource to people and share it more broadly. Okay, now ArcGeo story maps, what they are for people who are familiar with them is they're a digital location sector technology that lets you combine maps with text, images, and multimedia content to tell a story. In its simplest form, it's the coming together of digital media and geography, which is very much, as a GIS person myself, is very exciting for me. And it's great to get these stories and to be able to collaborate with people like Rob and Skye and others on these sorts of projects. Now, I'm certainly not a trailbreaker in this sense. There's actually on the Esri website, and they're the makers of the story map technology. They've actually got an entire page dedicated to the digital humanities and story maps that have been created right around across the globe. So I'll provide that link at the end of the presentation, but it does give you an idea of how people are using this in different contexts. And there's certainly different templates and different approaches to how people are using this technology to get those messages out and across. What I want to show you here is some work that we did previously on a story map. This was one of our first ventures into this space. We did South Australia's multicultural story. This gives you an idea of what one looks like. Obviously, Rob showcased one we've got in development at the moment, but this one we created back in June 2019. And as you can see, we have charts, graphs, and images. We have interactive charts built into it. You can use other technology with it. The chart you're seeing there shown is Microsoft BI that features in the story map. And we've also put animations, GIFs, and those sorts of information in there. Now, this project came about by us bravely pitching to the Department of Premier and Cabinet. We haven't done this before, saying that we could actually deliver something like this in the digital space. And they were willing to go on that journey with us, and this was their resulting output. Now, the alternative to this would have been traditionally a report, probably 40, 50 pages, a lot of content, a lot of hard copy maps to get information across. This we were able to get out and make publicly available. We've had over I think 3,000 or 4,000 hits on this site, people viewing it as individual views since it was released. Certainly not qualifying that viral category, as a lot of internet sensational stuff happens these days, but I don't know whether we'd get a similar amount of uptake from a hard copy map that was available for download. So it does give you an opportunity to let your users explore the map into more or less detail, depending on what their interest is. Now, at the Hugo Centre, like I mentioned, the multicultural story map, which is this top one up here, was one of our first ventures in there, but we're using this more and more to collaborate with other researchers and to sort of get more of our research out in a different format, in that sort of digital sort of format. So the second project here I've been involved with was led by a colleague of mine, Dr. Danielle Taylor at the Basil Hetzel Institute, where we developed a story map on Australia's frail and pre-frail people, where they were living today, and concentrations on that frail, where those frail people were anticipated to be located. And we also did some projections to look at what that may look like in 2032. And that was designed to help plan services for healthy aging moving forward. It was one of the first frailty web maps to be created to really push this information down to a geography focus around where people with frailty reside. The third one there is obviously references to what Rob and Skye discussed in the ARC linkage project we're working on. The next one down here is an Uhuru project I'm working on. It's about mapping lower income renters in Australia, age 50 plus. We're also showcasing where those people reside in the future, and also profiling them around some of the challenges that older renters face, particularly those on low incomes. We're hoping to have that released in a couple of months' time, so that's just being peer reviewed at the moment. And the last one, which is a new project, which we recently had funded, we're going to be working with interim head of school in social sciences, Melissa, and the head of school in biological sciences, Professor Bronwyn Galanders. And we're going to use story maps as a digital and visual stakeholder engagement tool. And we're going to try and heighten community awareness around the value of marine protected areas, specifically those Commonwealth ones around South Australia and also around the country. So as you can see from the broad range there, we've used in a variety of contexts, and story maps really give you that opportunity to do so. So what makes a good story map? Well, I think like anything, it's about the content you have. You know, you've probably heard of the comment, garbage in, garbage out, and it's very true in this context as well. So if you want to develop a good story map, you really need your own content. You need subject matter experts developing, or yourselves developing good research, analysis, and outcomes that you want to promote, and use the story map as that icing on the cake, not the focus of the project, because it's really about getting that story out to a broader population, a base. Know your audience is the next thing. Who is it for? Who are you trying to target? If you're wanting to go for a very discrete community, you don't want it made publicly available, then Story Maps is probably not for you. Story Maps is a very public data sharing platform. It's based within the ArcGIS online software tools. So there's other tools as part of this platform, and Story Maps forms one of that. And I'll come back on that point in a little while. What are your key messages and outcomes? It's like anything with telling a story. You need to have it flow. You need to have it take your users on a bit of a journey, and provide data and information as part of that journey. So you're catering for people who are going to very quickly glimpse over the information that's made available, and also cater for those who really want to delve into more detail. And also structuring your content. So you might come up with all your great content. You've got a fantastic report ready to go, and you want to sort of showcase it in a story map. It's about then trying to think about how your content can be made more visual and less sort of text heavy. To give you an example of that, I'm just going to draw on an example from our multicultural story map, and I want to just acknowledge Dr. Romy Wasserman, who was our migration expert lead on this project. What we've tried to do here is transform a number of paragraphs of analysis and data and put it together in one single image. So as you can see from here, we're trying to characterise the top 5 migrant groups in South Australia, and it's a very easy way of people quickly glancing at things that are of interest to them, whether it's the studying sort of components of these different groups, or whether they want to look at all of it holistically. It gives people a chance to spend as little or as much time as they want on the page to explore the data and information we provided. Like I said, breaking down from multiple paragraphs for the user actually telling you a lot of detail about the analysis to let people explore it at their leisure. This is another alternative version from the same story map. This is looking at country of birth by region since post-World War II to present day. And what we've done here deliberately is really come up with just one key message, in that we're now less sort of orientated from European backgrounds, and there's now more of a prominence in our local community in South Australia, from sort of Asian regions and other places. Now, we could have made this a little bit more detailed and put individual countries in there, but it would have detracted away from the message. So again, it goes back to thinking about your audience, what messages you're trying to convey from the research, and then providing that data in a way that's very visual and easy to sort of consume. Layout and flow is the next thing to highlight. Now, a really good tool for people to use if they want to build a story map from scratch is actually PowerPoint. PowerPoint's really good in being able to put your images in the slide, and your commentary you want to have that sort of complements that in the notes field. I know it sounds really basic, but if your first venture into this space is to open up a story map and start writing content from scratch in the story map development view side of things, you're going to be spending a great deal of time trying to work through that. It's really best to plan it out well, look at what you can do. By all means, start up a story map, do some demonstrations, look at what the technology can offer, and sort of keep that in mind with your content, but certainly plan it really well from the start. It will save you a lot of time, and it will help to get your story and your content spot on, so it really speaks to your audience. Now, being a GIS person, I have to mention location. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning for the work that I do. Location can add so much value to research. I won't go in more detail about that. I'm happy to explore that on a separate webinar in the future. But location, this platform is based on location. So maps and capturing data that has a locational focus is what a story map is based on. There are other website builders out there that don't require coding. And again, if you're looking at story maps but thinking, I don't want to touch location at all, it's probably there's other options out there that you could explore that will probably suit your purposes. But certainly consider location, even just from a research perspective, because it can add some insights in there that you might not have might not have been able to draw from your data as a result of considering geography. And seventh point there, take a multidisciplinary approach. Now, you've got your subject matter experts like Robert and Skye who are working on the project that we talked about earlier. But also too, you might want to build in some with a graphic design background. You might want to build in some people with some media experience to really help your story map and to transfer that content from sort of more text into something that's much more interactive and appealing. And the last thing, and an important thing as well, is the open data sharing platform. Now, ArcGIS Online, like I mentioned before, is the platform which Story Maps features. There is also, we're using ArcGIS Hub as part of the project with Rob and Skye. And again, both of those mediums facilitate open data sharing. So if your data, as I mentioned earlier, is confidential, you don't want to share it, then again, consider other alternatives. But we think this has been a strength of the story maps because it really does give the project a life beyond the funding cycle because others can draw on that information. All the map data that features in there can be consumed in a GIS application or built into other web-based maps that people want to use, referencing us as data custodians. So it does really give the project and the work that you do a life, and so it doesn't sit on a shelf gathering dust. Now, where to from here? For those of you who are really interested in story maps or this type of technology, Google's your friend. Have a look, see what else is out there. If story maps is something you come back to and think, look, this is really what I'm looking for, there's a link up there on the screen for you. The University of Adelaide does have an ArcGIS Online account for academic research purposes only. But for people who are interested, the best thing I'd suggest is take a free trial. They're 21-day trials that Esri offer. Log in, you can always transfer your data across to a university account at a later stage. But in particular, it gives you a chance to try the full features available and just to test it without worrying about whether you're going to be doing something you shouldn't be. It just gives you that sort of open sort of sandbox space to play around with the technology and see what it might do for you. And certainly there's the link to the Digital Humanities story page, story map page I mentioned earlier. The last thing as well is, as I mentioned, the uni has an academic account. It's only for academic research purposes, but if you want to use a story map to showcase some of your contract research or consultancy work that you might be working on, the Hugo Centre has a commercial license because we do that as well. And we use this platform not just for story maps, but for other components of geospatial work. So speak with us. We can partner with you on a project if you've got an idea. Or if you just want to use location in more detail with your research, then the link to myself down there on the bottom of the page. Feel free to drop me an email. I'm happy to discuss and collaborate with others on different initiatives if you're thinking about story maps or location more broadly. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour on what story maps can offer. So I'll hand back to Alexis at this point.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jarrod, Robert and Skye for two distinct perspectives on a collaborative project. I think there was a lot there for people to learn. So with that, I'm going to introduce our final speaker for today, who's Dr. Bill Pascoe, who's joining us from the Centre for 21st Century Humanities and the Centre for Literary and Linguistic Computing at the University of Newcastle. Bill has a background in English, creative writing, semiotics and philosophy, but has more recently been working in a range of different projects across finance, water engineering, science, health and humanities. He's been a leader and contributor in innovative and high impact projects, including the Colonial Frontier Massacres Project, which was referenced by a couple of our earlier speakers, and projects around endangered languages, stylometry software, virtual biobank, 3D medical imaging processing and e-water. They're speaking with us today about the time-layered cultural map, and with that I will hand over to Bill. Thank you.
Hi, Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. So I'll speak today mostly about TLC Map, or Time-Laid Cultural Map, which is a project we got firstly an ARC grant and now a ARDC grant to run. My talk is a summary of one I gave the other day, so I'm sorry if anyone was at the other one and there's a bit of repeated content. But I'll also paste a URL in the chat so that, well, you can follow it there. And it's also a sort of a self-paced course. You could if there's like TLC map in 1 hour or TLC map in a day, depending on what you want to do, if you want to know more. So yeah, sorry, I'm on the land and water of the, pardon me, Awabakal and Warramai people in Malabimba, or Newcastle, which means place of ferns. So TLC Map is a platform of digital mapping, digital humanities mapping tools that aim to make digital mapping easier for humanities researchers. So it's not a map of all the culture in Australia. It's a suite of tools to help you make maps. The idea being that you shouldn't need to have like a 6-month project and employ software developers and research assistants just to make a basic map. You can still do that, of course, if you've got like a massive project or something, but the main thing that we're focused on is just providing tools to make common tasks much simpler and easier without having to be a software developer. So our approach is because humanities researchers' needs are quite diverse and idiosyncratic, and across all the disciplines and within disciplines, our approach is to make a software ecosystem where there's different tools for different purposes. Some focused on time, some looking at time in different ways, and also being able to link off to other resources, so that if you've got a website that deals with your material in a detailed and unique way, you can still use these tools for some spatiotemporal aspects and link from maps to those other resources. It also means that we've partnered with a few different tool providers, because we don't want to just build another GIS system. That would be pointless. What we're really focused on is providing functionality that's lacking in existing GIS systems that humanities researchers need. I'll just screen share there. So, for example, if you just go to tools on our website menu, tlcmap.org, there are tools there for different purposes. Quick Tools has, the main one there is Quick Coordinates, which is meant to be, if you just want to create a spreadsheet and put coordinates in it, or if you have an existing spreadsheet and you just want to find coordinates for every item in the spreadsheet, which is a common need, this is going to be a very quick way to get it. You can click on various points. It works similar to Excel, not exactly the same, but you can type in place names and click to get coordinates. Also, it's connected to the to our gazetteer, which uses data from the Australian National Place Name Survey, and seems to be the largest, or just the best place to get an aggregate of all the state information on place names, including historical information. Obviously, it's not totally complete, but there's about 300,000 records in there for the whole of Australia, from all the states, and including historical information and some Indigenous place names as well. So that's linked to this. So, for example, if you searched for a place here, Port Stephens, it will put any place named Port Stephens. There's only a few of them around near here. There. So that sort of makes it even easier to get coordinates for particular places. You could just pick the right one and the coordinates go in your spreadsheet there. Now, also crucially, if we're going to have a software ecosystem, the important thing is that all the parts are interoperable. So that means we depend on open standards for mapping file formats, which in our case are KML and GeoJSON, which are mapping file formats. And we also support CSV files, which are basically just spreadsheets. If you have an Excel spreadsheet, you can save it as a CSV file, and you can open CSV files in Excel. So that means that any work you put in, you can also get out. So if you create something with one of our tools, you can export it as a KML file, open it in some other tool according to your needs, or open it in some other GIS system that's not even, that we haven't even done any work on. So let's go back to the main page. So I mentioned the gazetteer. There's also spatiotemporal metrics, which enables you to get, at the moment, just some very basic statistics on spatial data sets. You can't just take the average of latitude and longitude, for example, because the Earth is round. It actually takes some quite complex trigonometry and so on to get sensible statistics from spatial data. And then there's partner tools. So there's Temporal Earth, which is for mapping over time. Sorry, I'll just do that again. Well, a few systems support, timelines and so on. It takes a little while to load, but I suppose, yes, it's time-layered cultural map, because I'll just mention this point that humanities researchers typically have time as an important part. They're not just interested in space. We're interested in time, in change over time, the history of things and so on. So that's why we've called our project Time-Layered Cultural Map, because time is so important. And one issue that you often have with GIS systems is that they don't support dates too far into the past. That goes to a very basic IT level, where even the date type in a database often won't support BC dates and things like that. So sometimes it's anything before 1900, you've got a problem. Sometimes it's anything that's BC, you've got a problem. Sometimes it's anything before the year 1000. Anyway, what we try to do with TLC Map is make sure that all of those possibilities are supported. One advantage that Temporal Earth has over other timelines is the ability to zoom in and out. So you can zoom into the single day level, or all the way out to centuries and millennia. And you can load KML files on the web, or from the web or from your computer. Other ones are, have to try and be quick, Recogito, that's out of order at the moment, sorry, should be up online later in the year, but that's about automatically finding places in text and creating interactive maps with them. Hurist is for when your data gets a little bit more complicated, when you need something more than a spreadsheet or more than a map with pop-ups and a link. It's for if you actually need a relational database, or some other more complicated relationships exist in your data. Hurist, there is a bit of a learning curve for it, but it's kind of the best thing available for doing that sort of stuff. Honey, Humanities Networked Infrastructure, and RO-Crate, which is when you've done your project and you need to archive it, it has some geospatial functionality where you can wrap up your whole project. It's not limited to geospatial either. It's it's meant to be for archiving humanities data generally. Anyway, that enables you to deposit it, for longevity in your university archive or some other data repository. So I will, just quickly mention one of the other major aspects of TLC Map, which is the Gazetteer of Historical Australian Place Names and Map Finder. I usually just call it the Gazetteer. And I mentioned it earlier in that you can query it from Quick Tools. So it has, as I mentioned, about roughly 300,000 Australian place names. People have been reporting they find this really useful because of those little things, like if you searched Google or somewhere else for a particular homestead, you're not going to find it, but this is likely to turn up results that are more specific to Australia for you. You can do a contains search, you can do a fuzzy search, or an exact match search. You can search on, it works like an and, where you can combine all of these things together. State, parish, that's from the official state records, though in some cases they're incomplete, so you need to be a bit careful of that. You could upload a file of many places, or variant spellings of a place name that you want to search for. And one thing I find most interesting and useful is you can, if say you're just interested in what information there is about a place, you can draw a circle around it, or a square. There's various shapes here. And just say, well, give me everything that's within that circle. And there's all your results. And you can combine that with the other search things. So I could find everything within that circle that's called Newcastle, and only get variations of place names that contain Newcastle. Now, the other most important thing about this is that you can contribute information to it. If you've got a humanities data set, to me, this is one of the most important things about the whole project, and it's where the layers comes in, is that if you've got a humanities project and you can export your some portion of your data, at least as a KML file or a CSV file with coordinates, you can contribute that layer to the Gazetteer or the map finder. And that means, and when you do that, you can also, provide links. So it'll be properly referenced and link back to your site. So in a way that can help drive traffic to your project, because people can come here and say, well, what's around Newcastle, and find it. And the way that they might do that is search for not just the Gazetteer of place names, but community contributions of data. So from the research community. We should probably find a better name for that. I haven't quite figured out what it is. But what that means is that I could search this area for, sorry, I'll just draw a better circle, for anything in community contributions, and come up with all the results. There's a lot of them, I think, are from, they're from Auslang, Indigenous languages. So at the moment, because we've only just begun, we've only just launched this, there are, if you look under public data, that's all the public all the contributions that have been made so far. So at the moment, there's only a few contributed by myself, and mainly by myself and Professor Hugh Craig, my colleague. But we hope that will grow. We'll certainly be adding a lot more by the end of the year, and we hope there's a few people with projects that we're helping get their data in there, and we just hope that will be taken up more broadly, so that people can find much richer information, and so that when someone, say, searches Newcastle or particular place, they get like multiple layers, and that all builds up to the meaning of a place in general. The meaning of a place is not just the one thing, and it's not just the one layer. It's the way that they all overlap and connect with each other and connect with other places, and so on. So you could look at, say, this particular data set, and not only can you get the results, but you can view them, say in temporal Earth is one way of visualizing them. So, I mean, if you wanted to use temporal Earth, you could just upload your KML file from your disk, but you could also contribute it to the gazetteer and just have that button. So that's got points around the world, and you can click on them, and there's not much information. This one's just the place name. Or you could view in 3D. And see, this one's got a bit more metadata, including links back to the place and the data set. And what other options? Oh, sorry, you can export everything in KML or GeoJSON if you want to, use it in another system, do further research on it. Also, each individual one you can view in Google Maps if you just went, well, that's interesting. Now I want to know how to get there and use street maps or something. Or each individual place can be seen in the 3D viewer. Like that. So I think that's probably where I should wrap it up. Is there much time, Alexis?
Not much time left at all. Thank you very much for that, Phil.
Right,
so I think, and thanks for sharing those notes. I will share these links with the participants after the webinar as well. I particularly like to comment that the historical gazetteer is happening. I have seen previous digital humanities projects that have sometimes fallen down at the point where historical place names either don't exist in gazetteers that are designed for contemporary use, or that where places move over time and that kind of thing. Yeah. So we have a little bit of time for questions. I'll remind people they can put questions in the chat window if they like. I'm going to open with a question of my own, and I'm actually going to direct this probably initially to Robert and Skye. So you had talked a little bit about, you and Jarrod talked about using story maps to share the outcomes of this research project. As historians and as researchers, have you found that seeing this information on a map has opened your eyes to any new perspectives, or you've learned anything new about the data that you're working with from the process of putting it on a map?
Yes, I mean, it's a research tool as well, because one of the things is we want to visualize what's going on. And intuitively, as you sort of research this history, you sort of see, okay, there seems to be a lot of deaths occurring in the southern portion of the colony and less in the north, which sort of starts to show patterns of what's going on. Through time, you sort of think, oh, okay, the El Nino and droughts are having impacts on perhaps exacerbating conflict in certain regions. So it's a research tool in that sense. Skye?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jarrod, we haven't done it yet, but we're planning to have a, like a sliding scale. So like Bill showed us, so the incidents of conflict will crop up that happened in that year. I think that's going to be really useful as well, which will be more, very useful for the viewers, I think. Yeah.
I mean, well, one of the things about doing history is about the recognition of patterns. And so, being able to map this both temporally and spatially is interesting. One of the things we didn't talk about is that we're also going to map, and exactly how we do this, we're not sure, but there are a whole bunch of legacy accounts of what's going on. So there's an event that occurs, and then sometimes there's a whole series of subsequent stories that's told about it. So that's one of the things we want to map temporally. So it sort of opens up an epistemology of knowledge sort of dimension to that analysis as well.
Thanks. We have had a question come in from Mariam in the chat, and it's about story maps, and asking if you could elaborate a little bit on the learning curve for a tool like that. she acknowledges that's a little bit of a vague question, depending on who the learner is, I guess. But how much programming experience might be required, for example?
Well, I mean, perhaps Jarrod can come in on this. That's why we've got Jarrod involved in this. And that's been an interesting exercise because, essentially the data is going in forms of spreadsheets. But then we're learning by what can be visualized through the potential of that technology and what can't be. And then we're modifying how we're approaching it. So it's a sort of to and fro between someone who has expertise in doing story maps and people who don't. But I mean, Jarrod perhaps can make a comment here.
Yeah, look, certainly. Look, it's a tool that's very easy for people who want to jump on board and try out. It's very much dragging containers around on a page, inserting, text boxes or inserting images and those sorts of things. So if you've got some basic sort of IT skills, you'll be able to get started in it. I think where the learning curve goes up is obviously people are very used to using the internet and seeing very good websites. So what I find as well, people start to use this tool and they go, oh, I really want it to do this, and I want that pop-up box to include this information, and I want this component to be on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side of the page. And that's where you start to, the learning curve goes up quite a bit, because you can build in quite a bit of code that can really give it that sort of bespoke look and feel. And certainly with the work I'm doing with Rob and Skye, we have been putting some coding in there, the way in which we show some of that data and information. But certainly for someone just wanting to get started out, it's very easy to use. And you don't need that sort of coding background to do it. I think what I would suggest as far as a learning curve would be to look at what makes a good website, that sort of information, because it's really presenting the information that you want to look at, developing some skills. You don't necessarily need to be a GIS expert to use that tool. The tools are pitched at people sort of wanting to come in and learn a bit more about showing their data and information in that way. And it's also used to sort of introduce people a bit to the geography space and what location can benefit, how location can improve or add value to your existing research approaches.
Thank you very much. We don't have a huge amount of time left, and I'm going to ask a question. It's going to take way more than 2 minutes to answer. But I'm kind of actually very interested, if people indulge me to go over time just a little bit. Bill and Skye, perhaps, if maybe either or both might have a different perspective on this. I feel that one of the risks sometimes, if you're trying to combine GIS and humanities, is that perhaps the map suggests some form of certainty or some form of precision that isn't necessarily there in the information that you're working with. Is there, Bill, you've worked on a number of these humanities projects. I'm wondering whether you've encountered that issue and how you work around it. And Skye, as someone who works with the intersection of memory and history, I imagine that's a concern that's on your mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I could say quite a lot on that. So you'll have to stop me.
Another webinar, perhaps.
Okay. And that's something that everybody I talk to about digital mapping humanities mentions. But our data is very vague, and certainly in projects I've worked on, there's especially historical stuff. Someone says, "Oh, it's 5 miles up from the creek," 5 days ride away. Who knows? But at the end of the day, if you're using a digital tool, computers are pretty dumb and computers don't understand vagueness. If you want a point to appear on the map, if you want a date to appear on a timeline, you have to tell the computer where to put it. So you have to yourself settle on a date. And the way we handle that just pragmatically is to resolve on a date, our best estimate, but always provide a qualifying text column. So you can say, and you can address it in like your introduction or whatever, places are accurate to a certain amount, or for each item, this place is accurate to a certain amount, or, the text actually only says 5 miles up the road. So just always put in the qualifying stuff. But further to that, what's the right way to indicate degrees of vagueness? There's so many ways you could do that. You could simply say, this is inaccurate. Or you could say this is very accurate or not so accurate. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 3. Or you could say this falls within the range of 500 kilometers or 50 meters. Again, every project's going to have different needs for that. What I'm finding, just in general, not as a proper study or anything, anecdotally, is that people are tending to take the middle ground of the sort of a scale of 1 to 3 or scale of 1 to 10. This is very precise or not so precise. But as part of our current funding, one of the CIs is specifically taking up that challenge of what's the proper way to represent in a database with, according to some schema, what are the best practices for representing vagueness. That's the data structure side, but then there's the visualization side as well. We end up with points on a map. The default icon is usually a pinpoint, like a little pin. Do we have polygons? Do we have blurry regions? We're going to hopefully this year figure out some best practices for that.
Might not be something we can ever find perfect agreement on with that.
Yeah.
So did you? Yeah, just
we found we've exactly as you're saying, Bill. So when we're entering in the coordinates, we've got a line that we mark, which is either precise, close, approximate, district, or unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So that is in the data, but exactly as Bill was saying, how do we represent that on the map? Because people, you can write whatever you want, you can put as many qualifiers at the beginning, but people are going to look at that map and they're going to go, boom, that's where that was. And it's like, what kind of happened here because such and such and such. So yeah, we're still figuring out that. I like what you're saying, Bill, like whether it's you have a blurry one or a sort of not so precise, like a bit that might be the option. So immediately look at that and they go, right, it wasn't definitely in that spot.
One of the things is the sidebar has, if we've got the description, so it might be 5 miles from the head station, those sorts of things. So it's being reinforced in different ways.
But it's also the thing, not only the place, it's also the number of people that might have been injured or people that might have been killed at that place as well, because often that's not precise. So how you represent that as well, without people immediately seeing the highest number and going, that many people must have died here, or the lowest number.
And whether you use the conservative estimate or
or the between, we've been juggling with that as well. We initially were putting highest estimate, lowest estimate, but I don't know how we something that we've still got to keep working through, how you best show that on the map.
If I could jump in, there's also a little bit about what the map you're wanting to achieve with it. So if you're wanting to provide people with an indication of where an event occurred, it doesn't have to necessarily be that precise. But if that precision requires you to be accurate to a street address where a particular house is located, then obviously that's very different. So it comes a little bit to the purposes of what you want to use that map for. But I think like everyone's saying, it's also about qualifying the degree of accuracy, because you don't want to mislead people. You could lie very well with maps, and that's certainly not something you don't want to do, especially on research projects. Yes, it's a very good book I understand called How to Lie with Maps. So I'd suggest people look that one up. You can do some very creative things.
A lot of reasoning goes when I'm putting a place on a map, like putting so much reasoning is going on. I'm looking at old pastoral lease maps. I'm looking at different documents to get the names of that place. So how you can get that reasoning in, you can't really, can you? You can't get it. All the background thought that is going into putting that place on that map. It's not just a random, it must have been around here somewhere. But
and if you did, like, you can put some of that in the explanatory field or the sources, but that all still just depends on the person on the web, which is not likely taking the effort to go and have a look.
Look at that and go, oh, right, that's where it definitely happened, or whatever.
Yeah. So one thought I had about about that issue of the initial response of a website viewer who has a short attention span is how do you get that message across with an icon? So sometimes it comes down to just very simple things like instead of using the default pin or something that, at least comes down to a point, use the circle, or use, I think maybe even better for vague information is a ring. So at least that indicates somewhere in this area more so than a pinpoint, if you see what I mean.
Ring is a good idea, actually.
Yeah.
Not filled in, yeah.
I might wind that conversation up there. We are running over time, and it's absolutely my fault for asking a hairy question with 2 minutes to go. I thank our audience for their patience in sitting through that. I think it was an interesting question, but I also think I'm really glad Jarrod chimed in as well. Part of it perhaps is about knowing your audience and what they're going to need out of this, and knowing what the key messages and outcomes you want to work in. I wonder in the humanities, one of the joys is our the richness of our information, and so it can be the joy and the challenge. So I thank you all very, very much for your time, and I thank our attendees for participating today. It's been a really interesting discussion. I will send out a link to video recordings of those of these presentations that we're able to release after that. There may be an embargo on one part of it, but we will have these things up on the University Library website after the event, and I'll also send the links that have been shared today. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you at our next DH Lab activity. Bye.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.